Most men spend their entire lives building a fortress of glass, only to realize that a single stone of truth can shatter it in a second. Ethan stood on the cold concrete edge of his 60-story Manhattan penthouse balcony. The biting November wind ripping through his tailor-made $3,000 wool suit as if it were nothing but cheap paper. Below him, New York City stretched out like a glowing, restless circuit board. Millions of headlights crawling through the grid like digital ants. Completely indifferent to the man bleeding out financially at the very top of the world. Just 3 hours ago, the final emergency board meeting had ended in a suffocating silence that still echoed in his ears, leaving him with a stark reality. The multi-million-dollar supply chain he had spent 15 grueling years constructing had collapsed overnight. His closest business partners had already signed immunity deals with federal investigators, and by Monday morning, his name would be dragged through every major media outlet in the country. His chest tightened so severely it felt like a heavy iron anvil was resting directly on his ribs, making every breath an agonizing struggle against the rising tide of pure panic. For his entire adult life, Ethan had operated under the absolute delusion that he could control every moving part of his existence through sheer force of will, long nights, and aggressive negotiation. But now, standing in the freezing night air, the illusion had evaporated entirely, leaving him exposed and utterly broken. The phone in his trembling right hand buzzed continuously. A relentless barrage of frantic text messages from investors demanding answers. He did not possess and process servers threatening lawsuits. But he couldn't bring himself to look at the screen anymore. Instead, his eyes drifted down to a crumpled piece of heavy cream-colored paper resting on the glass patio table behind him. A handwritten note delivered earlier that afternoon by a silent, elderly courier who had traveled all the way from a secluded cabin upstate. The message from Master Alden, the reclusive old mentor who had once pulled Ethan's father back from the brink of a similar spiritual ruin decades ago, contained only 9 words written in elegant, unhurried ink. "You are trying to force the ocean to stop waving." Those words seemed to cut through the deafening noise of the city and the roaring chaos in Ethan's mind like a sharp blade, offering no immediate answers or financial strategies, but hinting at an ancient, untouched authority that Ethan had completely forgotten in his relentless pursuit of power. Realizing he had absolutely nothing left to lose and no other doors to knock on, Ethan turned away from the edge of the abyss, walked inside to grab his keys, and drove out of the suffocating gridlock of the city toward the quiet, dark forests of the north, seeking the only man who knew how to remain still when the entire world was burning down around him. The headlights of Ethan's vehicle cut through the heavy, damp fog of upstate New York as he pulled into the gravel driveway of the secluded cabin. The sound of the tires crunching against the stones, breaking the absolute silence of the wilderness. The air up here was crisp and smelled deeply of pine and wet earth. a stark contrast to the suffocating smell of exhaust and anxiety he had left behind in Manhattan just 2 hours ago. Stepping out of the car, his leather dress shoes sank slightly into the mud, ruinous to their polished shine. But Ethan did not care as his eyes locked onto the small, warm amber light glowing from the cabin window. He walked up the wooden porch steps, his hands trembling not from the freezing cold, but from the sheer weight of the ruin waiting for him after the weekend. And before he could even knock, the heavy oak door swung open to reveal Master Alden. The old mentor stood there wrapped in a simple, faded wool blanket, his deeply lined face holding no surprise or judgment, only a vast, unbothered stillness that made Ethan feel incredibly loud and chaotic just by existing in the same space. Without saying a word, Alden turned and walked deeper into the cabin, gesturing for Ethan to follow him into a room filled with the scent of burning cedar and rows upon rows of old, leather-bound books. On a heavy wooden table in the center of the room sat a single, ancient kerosene lantern casting long shadows across a thick, worn leather ledger that looked like it had survived a century of handling. Ethan opened his mouth to pour out the avalanche of his disasters, to explain the federal investigation and the millions of dollars lost overnight. But Alden simply held up a single, weathered hand, silencing the younger man instantly with a gentle yet unyielding authority. The old man pushed the heavy ledger toward Ethan, handed him a simple graphite pencil, and spoke in a voice as calm and steady as a deep river, telling him that before they could discuss his empire, Ethan had a critical task to complete before the sun rose. Alden told him that this book contained the life records of hundreds of men and women who had come to this very cabin over the last 50 years, seeking an escape from their heavy burdens. And Ethan's only job tonight was to read through the pages and place a single black line through the name of every individual who had completely run out of problems. Thinking this was a strange but simple mental exercise designed to distract him from his panic, Ethan sat down on the hard wooden chair, pulled the kerosene lamp closer, and opened the fragile first page of the ledger for the next 5 hours. As the wind howled against the cabin walls and the candle wax slowly melted onto the table, Ethan read through the deeply intimate histories of CEOs, politicians, artists, and ordinary fathers, all facing divorces, bankruptcies, terminal illnesses, and public scandals that mirrored his own agony. He flipped page after page, his eyes straining in the dim light, looking for the resolution to their chaos. But as he reached the halfway point of the book, a chilling and profound realization began to settle into his chest. Every single name that had a line drawn through it, every single person who had finally reached a state where no new problems arose, was accompanied by a final, innate date marking their deaths. Those who were still recorded as living, no matter how much wealth they had accumulated or how many crises they had successfully solved, simply had new problems written beneath their old ones, a continuous, never-ending list of challenges that shifted shape but never truly disappeared. Ethan's hand froze over the paper as the absolute truth of the ledger broke through his stubborn defense mechanisms. Realizing that he had spent his entire life fighting a war against an inevitability, waiting for a magical day of perfect peace that did not exist in the world of the living, Master Alden walked back into the room just as the first pale blue light of dawn began to touch the window panes. Looking down at the unblemished pages and the pencil that had not been used even once, the old mentor smiled gently, the amber light reflecting in his wise eyes, and told Ethan that the chaos outside would never stop moving. But the secret to survival was realizing that the storm only has power over you if you try to fight the wind, instead of learning how to become the anchor. The heavy silence of the cabin pressed against Ethan's temples as the realization fully washed over him. The pale light of dawn growing stronger outside and casting a cool slate blue hue over the thousands of uncrossed names in the heavy leather ledger. He looked up at Master Alden, the absolute exhaustion in his bones suddenly transforming into a strange, weightless clarity as he realized that the ceaseless noise of his impending corporate ruin no longer carried the power to crush his spirit. For 15 years, Ethan had believed that true strength meant fighting every single wave, shouting louder than the critics, and bending the entire world to his desires. But looking at the old mentor, who stood completely unmoved by the chaos of existence, he finally understood that the ultimate power belonged to the one who could remain perfectly still. He did not ask for a miracle solution, nor did he beg for a financial lifeline, because he now understood that Monday morning would arrive with all its corporate storms regardless of his panic, so he simply closed the book, stood up from the creaking wooden chair, and let out a long, slow breath that carried away the remaining fragments of his useless terror. The drive back to Manhattan was completely different from the panicked escape of the previous night. As Ethan watched the sun rise over the highway, the concrete towers of the city appearing on the horizon, not as a suffocating prison of judgment, but merely as a landscape of temporary challenges to be met one single step at a time. When he walked into the glass high-rise headquarters at 9 o'clock that morning, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom was thick with palpable dread. His remaining vice presidents pacing frantically, while the corporate attorneys shuffled stacks of legal documents with trembling hands. Everyone waiting for the inevitable explosion of anger from the man who usually tore the room apart during a crisis. Instead, Ethan walked to the head of the long mahogany table with a calm, unhurried stride. His suit still wrinkled from the cabin, but his gaze so profoundly steady and deeply grounded that the entire room fell into an immediate, stunned silence when the lead investigator from the federal agency began to read the long list of alleged violations in a stern, intimidating tone meant to provoke a defensive outburst. Ethan did not interrupt, did not defensive argue, and did not allow a single muscle in his face to betray a hint of fear or desperation. He waited until the final accusation echoed through the quiet room. looked directly into the eyes of his opponents, and spoke in a voice that was incredibly quiet yet carried the undeniable weight of absolute certainty, addressing every single point with precise, logical facts while cutting through the emotional hysteria of the room like a cold blade. By refusing to join the panic, by choosing the profound strength of absolute stillness over the loud weakness of defensive noise, Ethan completely shifted the gravity of the room, forcing his adversaries to realize that they were no longer dealing with a desperate man running away from a storm, but an immovable anchor who had already mastered the chaos.